So we're looking at a group that has a lot of good complement pieces, but two true alphas for their position in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. I think he's one of the best values at the quarterback position right now. Kyler Murray's being drafted as the quarterback 10 and 75th overall, better prospect than CJ Stroud was. And I think he lands in a much better situation. So it's wheels up for Caleb Williams in 2024 for fantasy football. I think the upside is going to be very, very real. Fantasy scoring from 2020 back to 2018, 23.5 points per game ranked second, 22 points per game ranked fifth, 21.3 points per game ranked fifth. So in his 3 full seasons, Deshaun Watson has been a top 5 quarterback in fantasy points per game. I think Philadelphia looked at San Francisco's success adding a dynamic playmaking running back in Christian McCaffrey that helped propel them into the Super Bowl. And they thought, hey, how could we mirror that? And they went and tried to do that by adding Saquon Barkley this offseason. I think he explodes in the best situation that he's ever been in. And we, again, once regarded this guy. We have seen great things out of DeAndre Swift through his career so far, just never put together. I think we've seen glimpses of rushing. I think we've seen glimpses of being a pass catcher. I think we've seen glimpses of touchdown upside. I think we've seen glimpses of fantasy football impacts. And for DeAndre Swift, I think being the lead back is going to mean a lot in this offense. You added 3 offensive linemen to the Steelers, which has been needed since Najee Harris has been a rookie. So again, Jaylen Warren is the big turnoff for Najee Harris. But if we look at how he operated weeks 11 through 18 last season and into the fantasy football playoffs, I think he can keep that stride going, especially being on a contract year. I think you can expect him to continue to be over 1,000 yards rushing. I think he's the only guy in the roster that actually profiles as a true running back one. I think he's got the build of a workhorse running back in this league. I think he's a guy that is a very effective runner. We saw that his rookie season. I think Jaleel McLaughlin serves as a pass-catching option that can spell Javonte. I think Audric Estime, I liked him a lot as a prospect. I think he's the future of the Broncos, but the now is very much Javonte Williams. Side notes, 6 games with multiple receiving touchdowns in his career, 2 games with 3 receiving touchdowns, 10 games with 120-plus receiving yards, 4 games with 150-plus receiving yards, 2 games with 200-plus receiving yards, 11 games with 25-plus fantasy points, 5 games with 30-plus fantasy points, and 2 games with 50-plus fantasy points. I think that a healthy Jamar Chase with a healthy Joe Burrow has the highest ceiling of any wide receiver for fantasy football heading into 2024. I think he's one of the biggest winners of the offseason. I think Kirk Cousins, you bring him in, it means a couple things. It means more passing volume, and the quality of the targets coming London's way improves. I think London's got the DNA of like a Mike Evans sort of wide receiver. I think he can finally be over 1,000 receiving yards in 2024. And I think he can have some touchdown upsides. I think the fact that he ended the season across the last 5 weeks so hot, and then that carried into the NFL playoffs, speaks numbers to me about Zay Flowers. I think that this is a guy that can continue on that upward trend heading into his sophomore season. And this was a good year out of Lamar Jackson through the year. He had career highs in passing attempts and passing yards. When it comes to versatility and when it comes to, being on the field and finding ways to impact the offense, it's Jaden Reed. The guy can line up in the slot. The guy can line up out wide. He can run the ball, So I think Reed is the best playmaking wide receiver in Green Bay. And I think it translated very well for fantasy football. I think that one thing not enough people talk about is that Adam Thielen was very, very relevant, even with Bryce Young struggling as a rookie for fantasy football. I think that Deontay Johnson is the clear-cut wide receiver 1 now in 2024. I think Thielen still plays a role, but when it comes to a guy that just simply earns targets consistently, runs the right routes, is just great at getting open, that's Deontay Johnson. He's been that guy, and I think he's going to be that guy he earned 93 targets with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett on the field as a rookie. Finished 21st in yards after the catch, despite ranking 95th in the depth of his targets. 6 weeks scoring 12-plus fantasy points in 2023. I think Jacksonville looked at Trevor Lawrence's 21 and 25 touchdowns the last 2 seasons and thought, hey, we can really use someone who can score touchdowns to elevate our quarterback. So now you insert the guy that just scored the most receiving touchdowns in college football last season into the mix, and you have a guy that could potentially be the team's wide receiver one, or just second round selection by the Chargers in 2024. You couldn't ask for a better landing spot for a rookie. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, and Gerald Everett are all out of Los Angeles. So that's an empty wide receiver room. 159 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. Final season at Washington with Rome Odunze, Chicago Bear, on the field. Second round selection by the Patriots in 2024, which was the first move that they made after they selected Drake May in the first round. Polk is the only guy, in my opinion, on the Patriots roster who profiles as a true wide receiver one. And I think he will operate as that in 2024. 25.5 fantasy points week 8, 21.1 fantasy points week 10, 22.9 fantasy points in week 13, 20.2 fantasy points in week 15. He had 131 receiving yards in week 10, 10 receptions in week 8. A lot of upside examples for Trey McBride. Your tight end for fantasy football is not supposed to score over 20 fantasy points at the rate Trey McBride did. Or I think he has tight end one overall upside. We're talking about, Josh Allen, who's passed for over 4,300 yards for 4 straight seasons and has thrown 35 plus touchdowns in 3 seasons through his career. So if Kincaid can be that number one target, but George Pickens defaults as the wide receiver one, I think that this means that Pat Freiermuth is the target number 2, which he was in 2022. So now we're looking at a guy who has an offense that is reshaped with quarterback and offensive line.